Welcome. My name is Brian Roderman, and I'm the Chief Innovation Officer for Into Innovation. We want to welcome you back to our Whiteboard Innovation Series. Today we're going to talk about the second segment in our series, so let's get right into it. If you remember, the last time we got together we talked about balance. Today we want to talk about thinking in innovation. Now, of course, there's thinking in innovation. But what types of thinking? And when do you apply that type of thinking? That's really what we want to talk about today. Now, if we look at our whiteboard, we'll talk about a point out here in time, this point B in space, where we focus on the end game. And the end game has a lot to do with the dollar sign, the revenue that we plan to generate with our new invention or our new innovation. And if that's point B, let's talk about what point A is. Well, point A obviously sits over here, and that point A is a big question mark. The who, what, when, where, why, how, all the questions that we want to ask and get answered that are going to lead us down this path to our revenue generation. Now, if innovation were just that simple, if it were just a straight line, but we know it's not. In fact, there are typically many barriers and roadblocks that sit in our path that will ultimately get in our way as we move ourselves down this path of innovation. But you know what? That's okay, because we can actually celebrate those barriers, we can celebrate those roadblocks, because if you know how to use them, you can actually do this. At the top of those roadblocks and barriers, in many cases, sit our new invention, our new innovation. They sit up here at the top of this peak. We just need to know how to apply thinking to get there and to get back off that peak, back over here to revenue generation. So let's use this illustration as the foundation basis to talk about thinking in innovation. If we go back over here, we talk about the starting point. What we can do is we can talk about how we get from this point here up to this point here. And what's really interesting is what I just did for you is I just created an illustration of what I like to refer to as divergent thinking. We just diverged from a point, and we started asking questions. We started asking questions about the consumer, the customer, the business, the technology, and we start building on this point. And we start growing from that point, and working our way out in a very divergent manner to ultimately get to a point where we have a lot of information, a lot of ideas, a lot of data that we now can take and compile to create a new invention. Divergent thinking can also be looked upon as creative thinking. Now, if you remember our last segment, we talked about balance. So, how would we balance out this illustration? Well, obviously, to balance this out, we're going to draw a mirror of the divergent thinking. And we're going to draw this. In fact, what I'll do is I'll draw a better line. That one's a little droopy. There we go. This is convergent thinking. Convergent thinking takes us from all this information that we've collected, and we're now focused on this point, and we're bringing all this information together. We're building databases, both in numbers, and we're building databases in geometry, and we're getting products prototyped and put into production, so ultimately we can take it to market and generate this. Now, this also can be referred to as analytical thinking. Analytical and convergent, creative, divergent. Now, that's really the foundation. That's really the two types of thinking that are applied in innovation. What we want to do for you now is we want to talk to you a little bit about a way that you can test to see what types of thinking are used in your own business, to see if you actually have a balanced, divergent, convergent thinking base for your innovation. Let's start over here. Now, in convergent thinking, there's a way to look at how you communicate and you talk to one another about innovation in your business using convergent talking and thinking. Now, here's the test. If you go into a meeting room, how do you talk to one another? What's the tools and techniques you're using to communicate your new innovations? Chances are you're probably using your computer, projector, a big screen, and something like Excel or a database tool to really communicate numbers, margins, quantities, right? Projections. All this information is very analytical in nature, and it's very important to innovation. And that's probably how you're doing a lot of your communications with your team members. Now, what's important, though, is we talk about the balance of this type of thinking in innovation. And if we look over here, you need to ask yourself, how much time do we apply to divergent thinking, to creative thinking? How much do we actually cross over this line, over this barrier, and get into a space that's a little more unknown because we have a lot of questions and not a whole lot of answers? Well, what's interesting is there's a way to test your divergent thinking. Go back into that same meeting room that you went into and looked at your data here. Let me ask you, is there a whiteboard in that room? Let me ask you this, if there is, when was the last time it was used? When was the last time you used it? In many cases, I'll actually go into businesses and find that there's stuff on the whiteboards that have been there for months at a time. In some cases, there's actually information on that whiteboard that I may have left the last time I visited with that company. And it could have been even weeks and months since the last time I was there. What it tells me is that some people are really uncomfortable working in a divergent space, building on a big white sheet of paper and letting other people collaborate in that space, to hand the marker off to somebody and let them build right on top of what you've just created or drawn, to create ideas and let them grow and let people add to them as they go and build this divergent base. That's really important, but we find a lot of people really are challenged in this space because they want to rely so much on their analytical thinking. Unfortunately, analytical thinking is based upon a lot of the knowns they already have in the system. You have to bring a lot of the unknowns to the system so that you can get a nice, strong balance of innovation thinking in your business. So, there you have it. Those are the two types of thinking. Let's summarize. If you remember, we talked about balance. Now we've talked about thinking. Next time you join us, we're going to talk about gains in innovation. We hope you join us for that. If you have any more questions, please join us at intoinnovation.com. We again thank you for joining us today. We certainly had a good time. We hope that you did too. Please join us again soon. For more on the topic of thinking, check out the book by Daniel Pink, A Whole New Mind.